And Annika, would you like me to keep accepting people so that you're
Yeah, that would be great, Henry.
sure. All right.
All right, you can go to the next slide and we can introduce ourselves a little bit. So like I said, my name is Annika. I work currently as an outreach coordinator for Dragons. So I help students and families learn about our programs and decide on a program that feels like a good fit for them. I have also led programs in Latin America. I've led summer programs in Peru and our Andes and Amazon semester. And then I also did the Andes and Amazon semester as a student. So I have seen many different sides to dragons, and I'm really excited to be here with Henry. I'll pass the mic off and let him introduce himself.
Thanks, Annika. It's so nice to see everyone. As Annika said, my name is Henry, and I'm the Latin American Program Director. I'm also the staffing coordinator, but that's less important for this program here. So yeah, we will be talking about Bolivia and Peru, as Annika shared in a more general sense, because we do run, I believe it's 5 programs there, and they do have a lot of overlapping themes. But there's also some differences. So yeah, I just wanted to say who I am. Annika is going to take through the next few slides, and then I'll take over for more regional specific descriptions. And we'll have plenty of time after for questions. So if you have a question, please type it in the chat so that we can come back to it after. If it's relevant to what we're speaking about at the moment, we might answer it on the spot. If not, we'll touch upon it later. Thank you everyone for attending and everyone that is listening to this recording.
Great. So as Henry talked about, I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to dragons, talk about our philosophy and our mission, and then talk a little bit more specifically about Bolivia and Peru in terms of our programming and in terms of countries and what you can expect going to these places. We'll talk a little bit about our course progression and then talks about some more specifics related to program themes, safety, all of that sort of thing. And then we'll finish off with a Q&A. So like Henry said, feel free to type in the chat if you have any questions that pop up, but you can also save it till the end and we'll open up the floor to some of your questions. So you all might be wondering, what does our name mean? Where does it come from? It's kind of a unique name. And our name comes from the idea that map makers used to draw dragons on maps to represent places that they had not explored or places that were unknown to them. So for us, going where there be dragons means exploring your unknown and going to your own map's edge. So what makes dragons unique? There are a lot of different programs out there that run travel programs and immersion programs, but there are a number of things that make us stand out. The first being that we offer truly unfiltered travel. And what this means is we are not going to be on tour buses going to the big tourist attractions, but we are really going to be immersing ourselves in the communities and the places that we visit. So this can mean confronting really challenging realities, maybe uncomfortable realities, often really beautiful realities, but we find that students walk away with a lot of growth at the end of this and a lot of experiences that they wouldn't have had if they had just gone to Peru or Bolivia, say, by themselves. We also offer custom crafted programming. This is one of my favorite parts working as an instructor, because instructors actually are the ones that get to create their itineraries based on their own personal contacts or the group's interests. So this might mean groups will do a homestay in a community that their instructor grew up in. This could also mean that we have flexibility to change our itinerary during the program. For example, maybe a homestay family invites us to a wedding one evening. We have the ability to change around our plans. We also can change around our plans if if there are group needs or health needs that need to be met. We also have incredible expert instructors who know the places we travel to, who know Peru and Bolivia very well. We have instructors that are from these places or have spent significant amount of time there, and they are able to really create an itinerary that speaks to their personal contacts and personal experience in the country. Our groups are small, so we have generally 12 students and 3 instructors, and this allows for a really personalized experience, getting to know your instructors really well, getting to know your fellow students really well, and also getting to know the communities we visit really well. And then finally, I'll speak to this a little bit more later, but our programs are unplugged, meaning students come without their phones, and this can be really nerve-wracking for some folks, but it can open up so many doors to be able to form really, really special bonds with people and experience things in a very new way. So I'll speak a little bit more about that later, but just want to mention that now. So who are our students? We have all sorts of different students coming from different places with different experience levels. Many of our students come from the United States. However, we are seeing more students come from Asia, Latin America, Africa, other places as well. And we don't require any experience coming into our programs. So that means no language experience is needed, no experience traveling. We really just ask that students come with a curiosity to learn about themselves, learn about the places we visit, and interact with people to really get to know the places we visit. I'll pass it
Cool,
off.
Annika.
Yeah, I'll pass it off to you, Henry, to talk a little bit more about the specifics in Peru and Bolivia.
Yeah, so Annika, great job covering the like general overview of Dragon's programs. I'm sure a lot of this is not new to many people watching this now because, as Annika said, some of you we currently have students enrolled. But I'd like to speak a bit more about Bolivia and Peru specifically, which is why you're here. This is a screenshot I just pulled off of our website earlier today. And these are the programs we're currently offering in Bolivia and Peru. So you'll see we have the summer Peru program. We have our South America semester, which is very popular. It's a 3-month program, which visits both Bolivia and Peru. We have a second Peru summer program, and then here on the right, you see the 2 Bolivia summer programs. I'm showing these just to touch upon the fact that we're going to be talking in more general terms about how we interact with communities within Bolivia and Peru. So we might not be zooming in completely on the program you might be signed up for. But like I said, at the end, we will have questions and answers, obviously not just questions. And please feel free to reach out to myself via email. We're also Annika. We're readily available to answer any specific questions you might have. All right, great. So let's move further into this. It was very difficult for me to summarize countries into these fast facts, but that's exactly what they are. Just quick things that I think characterize the country. Bolivia is very important to me. I was born in Bolivia and have lived here most of my life. So if you notice any bias towards Bolivia over Peru, I apologize. That's not my intention. Also a really beautiful country. But you can see just by looking at this topographic map that Bolivia is very biodiverse. I'm jumping to point number 4 here. It's among the 15 most biodiverse countries in the world. So we have Amazon mountain range that's running right through. We have one of the biggest salt flats in the world, the altiplano, which is just in Spanish just means high and flat. So it's exactly that, but you're above 4,000 meters. And then towards the right here, you can see we have the Amazon jungle. So very diverse country. You can visit many parts of it. We focus most of our time in this area. We stick mostly on the Andes region. but then we also do visit the Amazon, which is why we have the name Andes and Amazon. And then summer programs tend to stick a little closer to central Bolivia. So visiting places like Cochabamba, Santa Cruz, Sucre, and Potosí. Every city in Bolivia is very different, has many things to offer. And like I said, with your specific program, I recommend you to look at the tentative itinerary or the one that's available on the website, and to reach out if you have any questions. Bolivia is referred to as the heart of South America. It's a landlocked country, so it's huddled between Brazil, Peru, Argentina, Chile. And it's referred to as the heart just because it represents South America in many ways, as far as its indigenous populations, also the kindness that you can find here. It's just a country that I think is very emblematic of what South America stands for. Within Bolivia, we have Spanish as the main language, but then there are also 36 indigenous languages that are spoken. And this is spread out throughout the country. If you're visiting Bolivia, you will most likely be speaking Spanish, or definitely be speaking Spanish, and most likely have some encounters with Quechua and Aymara. The other language are spoken to a lesser extent, but you might still interact with them. An important thing here is Bolivia has 60% of its population identifying as indigenous, which is quite high. But that's something that you'll definitely see here as far as the way people dress, the foods that are eaten, different customs, different religions. And this is also seen in Peru, which I'll touch upon later. For reference, Bolivia has 12 million inhabitants, which sounds like a lot, but if you think about the size of Bolivia being approximately the size of Texas and California combined, with 12 million people, you can understand that a lot of these mountain ranges specifically, and a lot of the Amazon are not populated. So it's quite a large country, and there's a lot to see. Okay. And now Peru has, last time we looked, it was 43 spoken languages. I do acknowledge, similar to Bolivia, that many of these are languages that very few people speak, but they still exist, and it's part of the cultural heritage in Bolivia, in Peru, which makes it such an interesting country. You'll find there are over 4,000 varieties of potatoes in the Peruvian highlands, which is, it's kind of crazy to think about. I can probably name 13 or 14 of them, and it's insane that there are so many more than that. And potatoes are a big focus on programs. You'll see that you not only eat a lot of them, but you also learn about the importance of them, as far as them being a very hardy crop, but they also have a lot of importance within the culture. Another fun fact is 70% of the world's alpaca population lives in Peru. So you will definitely see an alpaca. That's something we can almost guarantee. And Peru has 33 million inhabitants, so quite a bit larger than Bolivia. And I always like to point out that Lima has over 11 million people. For reference, New York City, I think, has about 8.5. So Lima is quite a big city. And that also plays into some of the conflicts that Peru has as a country, just with the government being, in some senses, over-focused on this region, because 1/3 of the population lives there. But if you see on the map here how large Peru is, there's a lot of needs that are not met. That's also a topic that we look at on our courses. We center most of our programming outside of Cusco. About 2 hours is the Sacred Valley, and that's where our primary homestay families are, and that's where we do the majority of our programming, more in this area of southern Peru. And Annika touched on this a bit, but I'd like to share a bit more about our course progression. An important thing here is we use the word course, not trip. So the idea there is that something is being learned, but it's not in the same setting as you might see in classroom. I chose this photo here because I think it's a good representation of an environment that might be very stressful for students when they first arrive. Maybe they don't have the language skills. They're overwhelmed by not having prices, no price tags on anything. You have to bargain. in general, this market can be an overwhelming setting. So we've designed this like 5-step process to kind of address those concerns, and bring the student from not knowing much when they arrive, or maybe knowing a lot of things, but learning other things throughout the course. And then towards the end, just feeling that confidence and coming out a more prepared individual. So the first step is orientation. Here we receive the students, we do a lot of checking in, learning about them, their past, their dreams, what they hope from this trip, but also what they hope from life. And in orientation, we talk about, cultural do's and don'ts, basic hygiene. We're basically just setting up students for success. And here, typically, it can be in a beautiful setting. We try to just make it an enjoyable time for students to know each other and their instructors and really develop group norms. Once orientation is finished for a summer program, this might be 2 to 3 days. For a gap year, which is a 3-month program, we might push it up to 4 or 5 days. And like Annika mentioned, sometimes that's flexible. Some groups might catch on to topics faster than others, and that's where the flexibility is really essential to moving this forward. Once we finished orientation, we move into skill acquisition. This is where students are starting to learn a little more language. We might let them take a little more autonomy at the market as far as speaking to people. And they're just testing out these skills that a lot of them have, but they're just honing in through the various methods that we have available in the program. So in this skill acquisition period, they're testing themselves. Then they move on to practicing, which is even a step further. That's when they're getting a little more freedom. Even maybe the instructors are stepping back a tiny bit, but they're still guiding them. And that for me, when I was working as an instructor, was the most exciting part, because you feel that security of knowing that they'll be okay because you're right behind them, but you're also starting to feel very proud seeing the students with their improved language skills or comfort in homestay settings, or playing, different soccer or football games. And this moves us to expedition. And this is a student-led part of the trip. When I say student-led, that does not mean that instructors walk out of the door. It just means that students get to decide maybe where they want to visit, how they want to visit, how many days do they want to spend in a specific setting. In summer programming, this expedition phase will be shorter. In the 3-month program, it can be up to 10 days. We've even had some programs set closer to 2 weeks. But again, I just want you to know that it's not a completely free time where students do whatever they want. There is criteria, but there's a great deal of flexibility. And similar to the practicing phase, expedition is when instructors can step back and observe their students and everything that they've learned, which it's a really rewarding part of the job, and I think why most instructors do this one. And that brings us to the last part, which is transference. Transference is equally as important as the rest of this. Typically here, this is towards the end of the program. Students are thinking about lives back home, seeing their friends, maybe going off to college, or whatever it is that's waiting for them. So we really create a space that is dedicated to reflection, is dedicated to how can we carry what we've learned back with us into our context that is very different from where we've been. And again, looking back at this image, this is not the same supermarket a lot of students are accustomed to. And it's very easy to just go right back into the supermarket and not think or change anything about your behavior, or, just modify the way you're living. Whereas transference gives you the tools to do exactly that. We're not saying that all students will return completely different people. That's not the goal, but it's just to give them more tools to analyze things, to feel more comfortable, and also, as Annika mentioned, to discover more things about themselves. So although they are outside of their familiar setting, returning back to it, in many ways, they are different in the sense that they've learned skills or challenged things within them. So again, transference is more designed just to help them bring these lessons back home. So that's our course progression. And again, why we say course, also we use the word students instead of tourist. And all of this is just to share that space of learning that we strive to create within the program. And how do we achieve this? We have more program components than what you're seeing here, but these are the ones that I think are most pertinent to the South American programs. I put homestays on top because they are by far the biggest learning experience for students, in my opinion. It's often what students are most anxious about, but then also report being the most happy to have had the opportunity to partake in. And I understand it's difficult to go and live in someone's home, eat the food that they're eating, speak a language that might not be the most comfortable to you. But it's something that just brings so much joy, so many lessons that you can learn. So I put homestay up there. Spanish language, very important. I think a lot of students choose these programs because of Spanish and the fact that it's a growing language. It's becoming more and more important around the world in a cultural sense, but also just for communicating. So that's a huge component on these programs. They all have a language component, which typically is 2 to 3 hours a day of language study. But what's really nice about Dragons is once you get that language study, our goal is then to move you into a setting that you can practice in. So it's very different from maybe the Spanish classes you've had in high school that you forget on your way back home. It's a lot harder to forget it when you have to go to that market that I showed you and haggle for a bag of onions. Regional topics. I've left this broad intentionally because, as Annika said, our itineraries are built by instructors themselves. And depending on the instructor's experience, as well as the student desire to explore different topics, this can shift. But in general, we're looking at history, religion, social movements, etc. So like I said, it's very broad, and I understand that, but I intentionally left it that way. Then we move on to learning service. This is very different from community service, and it's more the way that Dragons approaches the idea of service, and it's something that needs to be learned. So we try to open a space for students to ask communities to observe and try to think about the idea of how do we help communities, and are there different ways? Is it just contributing with money? That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to explore different areas in which we can share this community bond and grow. So the key here is learning service. So it's not community service. We do not do community service as an organization. Um, and the last one here that I've put, which is my personal favorite, is trekking. I think Bolivia and Peru have just the most beautiful trekking opportunities. The trekking is more intensive in our 3-month programs, but there's also forms of it present in the summer programs. This picture you see here on the left is from one of our trekkings, and at night we often just try to create little spaces to share. And this is an example of experiential education. So we gave these students a prompt, and they went and sat here, and we took a beautiful picture of them. And I don't remember what exactly they were speaking about, but this is more the setting that we try to get students to engage with one another. And Annika will touch more about the unplugged travel and why that's so important, but I want you to think of this image specifically when you think of that topic, because I think for me, it really captures what a Dragons program can be, and it's something quite unique. It's difficult to find in the way that we live life nowadays. Homestays and community engagement. These are, like I said, for me, the most important component. And you can see on the bottom right is a picture from, I just led an orientation about a month ago with 2 of our instructor teams. And in this picture, you also see our homestay coordinators. I shared this picture just to kind of show the way that we interact with communities. So you have the instructors that are guiding the students in this experience, and you have the homestay coordinators who often are also homestay mothers. They're also just making sure everything goes well. These are people that we stay in touch with almost daily. And you can also see in the picture, we have our country coordinators, and their role is to work with the homestay coordinators, with myself and with instructors to just make sure that we're, putting the community first and being really careful in how we interact with these communities and just creating spaces so that students can learn from them. And also so that the homestay families and learn from the students, because the idea is that this should be a two-way street. And then I included this picture on the left, which is at the end of a homestay, and they're celebrating it with their homestay community by wearing the traditional clothing, which it's an honor, I think, for this community to be so accepting and open, and so happy to see these students that have spent a relatively short amount of time in their community, and to be able to take this picture together. And I think you can see how happy every student is here. So that's what we're striving for, is just an environment where we care for communities, and in return they care for our students, and that relationship just leads to mutual learning. That's our goal with homestays. And as I shared before, it's just a beautiful time for students. And then we have independent study projects and language study. Independent study projects we usually call ISPs, just because it's easier. But this could be multiple things. In Bolivia and Peru, there's a lot of dance that can be an ISP. We also have silversmithing. You have an opportunity often to build traditional instruments that are present in the region. We also have weaving. You can see on the bottom right, we have permaculture. So a lot of options there. And this is another area where students can really open their curiosity, or try something new that maybe they didn't think they would enjoy. And language study, as I shared, is a huge component, which happens through guidance working with language teachers who are very skilled and provide personalized lessons to our students. And again, you learn language outside of the classroom as well. I think that you'll notice you're able to learn quite a bit in a short amount of time. And I think that's a huge strength to our programs in Bolivia and Peru. Also because of the way people speak here and how happy they are to hear you trying. So Bolivian Spanish is slower, it's easier to understand, and they're just very happy and they welcome you into attempting to speak. So it's a welcoming environment to learn the language. And back to the more general topics, but the regional ones that are specific to Peru and Bolivia. Yeah, history, religion, culture, politics, social movements, climate change. So as I said, it really depends on your instructors, which topic you might be touching, but you will see all of this through being in these countries. So you see here on the right, you have a photo of a trek, and on the left, you can see students that are all holding something. I've shared this picture here because what they're doing is essentially asking for rights or it's like a rite of passage to access a mountain, or it could be a religious site. And this is like a small ceremony that we always have students partake in, and it helps them understand, the relationship to land might be different in Peru, or maybe it's different in Bolivia in ways that they're not accustomed to. So this small exercise of asking for passage before you climb a mountain or walk a trail next to a lake, as you can see in the photo on the right, often be quite a foreign concept. It is a great opportunity for touching those topics of how we are tied to land, what our relationship with the land is, addressing issues like climate change, which again, all of these topics that you see above are very important, and I won't go too much into the specifics of it. Just know that programs are designed to address these various regional topics. And then another thing that we like to say in Dragons is thinking about themes. So I've kind of taken the program components and moved it into themes, which are again across all the programs we run. Is the personalized Spanish instruction is a huge component. Land relationships and food systems, what I was just touching upon now. For many students, it is a foreign concept to know that the food on their plate maybe came from the backyard. And if it didn't come from the backyard, then they also know who the middleman might be, which comes in the form of a large truck that drove from the town next door. That's a huge opportunity, again, similar to the rite of passage, to just learn about how we are tied to land and the relationship that we have. Indigenous culture and identity is huge, especially in Bolivia, also in Peru. To just learn about how people are living, and also let them define what indigenous means. You might be surprised by their definition. And that's, again, another opportunity for learning. Grassroots movements and resistance. The way communities stand up for themselves here is quite different from what you might be used to. Just a personal example from today, I tried driving to my local market and there were roadblocks. I still don't know what the roadblocks were for, but I was not able to go to the market. This is something that was frustrating for me at some point in my life, but I also just understand it as part of life. And students within these programs will find that resistance and these types of movements come in many forms. And that's why we rely on our instructors to help guide them through that experience and understand it. So instead of it being a source of frustration, it becomes a moment of learning. And back to the trekking, I think Annika will touch upon this with the unplugged travel. But if you see in this photo, first of all, it's just beautiful. But I want you to try to picture yourself walking through this landscape and how powerful that might be of a moment if you've taken the time to really commit to this type of trip. So just think about that for yourself or your student or whoever might be interested in this. It's really just such an important part of the program. And the last point is Latin American history. You'll learn about this in so many forms. It might be through a conversation with the homestay parents, a homestay mother. It might be from one of your instructors, or it might be from a bus driver. There's so many areas where you can learn about this, but just Latin America has so much to offer in sharing its history and understanding the role that many countries around the world played in the development or underdevelopment, however you want to look at it, of Bolivia and Peru. So it's a topic that's definitely touched upon. Then food and safety. So I've written here on the top, potatoes, rice, corn, and different meats. This is usually the combination that you'll see in most meals in Bolivia. And Peru, typically, breakfast and dinner are not the most important meals, whereas lunch is. So you might notice that lunch is quite large. And often for dinner, people just have tea and a few biscuits or something similar. And again, this is what people typically have in these regions. That does not mean that as a student, you're not going to have a large breakfast or you won't have a large dinner. But it's part of the homestay experience. You might be surprised that they're eating different meals. But again, back to instructors, that's why they exist, to make sure you're getting enough food and feeling comfortable. In areas outside of cities, you have more simple diets. So you might have a soup with potatoes for, an early breakfast. And then for lunch, you might have potatoes again with something else. And for dinner, you might again have potatoes. Again, thinking about Peru, there are 4,000 types of potatoes. So I really invite you to eat as many of them as you can. Vegetarian, vegan, gluten-free, possible. So it's definitely possible. And we've heard many students who are vegetarian, vegan, or gluten-free. We just ask you to check in with us, explain if it's a preference, if it's something you're trying, maybe you want to try new foods, or if you're allergic. Sounds very different though, but please reach out to us and talk about that because there's many ways to navigate that. Water purification and food hygiene. One of the biggest issues we have in South America with programming is gastrointestinal issues, so GI issues. So we really just try to be thoughtful about where our water is coming from, making sure there's water available to students. If you're already enrolled in a course, you'll be hearing about this in detail. But if you're considering dragons, just know that this is something that's on our minds, and we work with students to try to cut back on the number of GI issues. And same with food hygiene. It's basic things, but we really push everyone to wash their hands and, you know, often sounding like your parents reminding you to do these things, but it's all really important. The last two topics here, safety considerations and medical care. This is where instructors play a huge role in caring for the student group, but we also partner with a international medical organization. They're called International SOS, ISOS for short. And we use them just to make sure that the medical care we're receiving is in line with what the students might have from their phone. So if we have doubts about a certain prescription that was given, then we have doctors on the line that we can call, check in with, and make sure that that prescription is adequate. And I think that covers the safe and safety considerations. As I mentioned, we have the instructors, we have the country coordinators, we have homestay coordinators, we have myself, we have an entire dedicated risk management team. So there's a whole network of people looking at safety. And now I think everyone's tired of hearing me speak, so I will pass it on to Annika.
So, like I mentioned earlier, our programs are unplugged, which means students will leave their phones or most electronics at home. And the reason we do this is not to cut off communication with friends and family at home. Students are still able to email. We post on the Yak board, which is a blog that is a great resource for families to stay up to date with photos, with poems, with all sorts of reflections and updates about what we're doing. And not having our phones on programs is an amazing opportunity. As a student, it was my favorite part of the program. I was able to form really strong connections with the other people in my group, and I was able to be very observant about what was going on around me. A lot of students will be very nervous about homestays and worried about not being able to communicate with their homestay family if they don't speak Spanish. And not having your phone is actually a really amazing tool in learning how many different ways we can communicate with our homestay families, whether that is through hand signals, whether that is through drawing pictures, whether that is just sitting in silence and watching a soap opera together. Whatever that might be, we use those opportunities to learn and to engage in a really special way. This photo, that's actually me. We are trekking in Bolivia, and I just remember on this trek, students were playing games the whole time. We were playing word games the whole time, and really just having so much fun. We were laughing a lot. And I think a big reason we were able to do that is because our students were completely present in the activity and in the trek. So I know some of you have already enrolled and some of you are thinking about enrolling in the future. Next steps, though, in order to save your spot on a program, we ask for you to submit a deposit that will save your spot. We accept applications on a rolling basis. So once you submit your application and a deposit, we will get in touch with you for a phone interview, which is just a casual conversation with our admissions team to chat through the program, answer any questions you might have. And then once you're accepted into your program, we will send out program prep materials, which will include vaccination info, flight info, packing lists, all of that sort of more logistical information. For folks who have already enrolled, you should very shortly be getting all of that info sent to you. So I think in the coming few weeks, we're starting to send that out. So keep your eyes peeled. Great. Henry, do you want to move on to, I was just looking at the chat. Do you want to move on to Q&A?
Yeah, sure. So I'm just seeing one question. Is that the only one, Annika, at the moment? Okay, so I see the question, yeah, do they need to bring money with them? Answer to this question is they don't need to bring money. Everything as far as lodging or food is covered. But if students want spending money to buy souvenirs, or maybe they want some extra snacks that are not really necessary for the diet, if they would like to have it, then we do recommend that students bring, I think we say approximately $75 to 100 for every week or 2 weeks. I don't remember the specifics for it. And again, that depends on the program. And that's part of the pre-course material. So there are recommended amounts there, and there's also a lot of recommendations about what the money needs to look like as far as the uh, quality of it, because they won't accept all bills, and also how to be safe with money. So good question, and it will definitely be addressed in the pre-course materials. Um, yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add on that one, Annika.
Something else to add is it is recommended to bring extra money in case there is a need to buy medication or health related things. So that is something else to consider. But like Henry said, no extra money is required. Any other questions? You can feel free to turn your camera on if that's easier as well.
I see another question come in here. Um, I wouldn't say so much special clothing, but it might be different to the clothing that you maybe wear at home. Again, depending on the program, in Bolivia and Peru, we do recommend, like a long sleeve shirt, for example, to protect yourself from the sun, but that's also breathable. That's just a small example, but this is all to say that there's not like special clothing you need, but again, you will receive a packing list, which has a lot of recommendations as far as what would be important for this trip. Vaccines also for the pre-course materials. Um, we as an organization, we don't mandate vaccines. What we do is suggest that you look at different resources that we use and rely on. And there'll be a whole list of which vaccines those are depending on the program, which again are not mandated by dragons, but just